Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review. In this video I'm going to review Troubled Paradise by Slayyter. This is the highly anticipated debut album of pop singer Slayyter. She started a few years back by making some singles that got pretty popular, and then she released the 2019 self-titled mixtape, which was an album that I talked about when it came out, and for me it was a pretty solid mixtape. In some occasions I feel that it had some pretty great tracks. However, as a whole thing, it was certainly a pretty inconsistent release, and apart from a few singles that were excellent, it had a few tracks that felt kinda weak. I was still somewhat pleased and curious with her next direction, and I was anticipating what she was gonna do next, which leads us to this album 2 years later, an album that had many teaser tracks to it. I mean, half of the album was already teased. Half of these albums was singles, some of them even released back in 2020, having a huge gap between them. And on one hand I was certainly worried if we were going to have the same case like with a mixtape, where we would have some amazing singles and the rest of the album in regards of the deeper cuts would be forgettable. However, the thing is that almost half of the album is teaser tracks, and thankfully almost every single one of them is excellent, and I mean excellent, and this is what actually got me pretty excited listening to this album, because listening to those teaser tracks I ended up becoming really impressed with the results. The thing though is that listening to all of those teaser tracks, you're not really sure in what direction this album is going to, because it's a bit of a mess. It is really inconsistent, jumping from one single to the next. All of them kind of follow a similar formula of electropop and dance pop, but there are so many stylistic variations that make you kind of uncertain of what is the actual direction that this album is going to, which was somewhat the case with a self-titled mixtape. However, the one thing that I ended up really enjoying about Troubled Paradise is how much more it embraces the hyperpop side. There are multiple tracks in this album that ended up going into a more hyperpop direction, with a few distorted beats, a few distorted melodies, and overall vocal approaches filled with auto-tune, giving reference to some more modern era pop music. The album starts with a very first single that was released many months ago called Self-Destruct featuring Wuki, and this track is a trap banger. We got similar stuff like this with the 2019 mixtape, but this one definitely goes to another level. Like, this is super aggressive and it's really well done. I love the distorted bass, it's pretty straightforward and nasty, and when it comes to the chorus, the vocals felt like I was listening to Ice Pick. It had multiple similar dark vibes that I enjoyed it, and it's such an aggressive and banging song, and the unfortunate thing is that we don't really get another moment that is like this. However, as the album progresses, we still have some tracks that are pretty dynamic and pretty banging, but they don't really go to that trap side, which leads us to the very next song, Throatzilla, and this is where we get a pretty standard hyperpop sound. In this track, Slayyter makes an amazing job on sounding like Charlie XX. Like, literally her delivery, the auto-tuned vocals, feels like I'm listening to a Charlie XCX song. It is really well done to that regard. You can say that it sounds like a copycat, and I do understand that, but I still think that the job is pretty well done. I really like the delivery on this track, and it has a really good beat. It has this really sort of aggressive bubblegum beat, but it's also a quite melodic and really catchy song. With the next single is where we get a big change of direction, it going into some more straightforward dance pop and electropop material that have a bit of a throwback feel to them. We have the track Troubled Paradise, the self-titled one, which for me is possibly the one single that I ended up enjoying the least, but it still has some pretty nice moments. Like, I really like it when it contains this really well produced beat that has a great house feel to it. It really gives an impression that I'm listening to an old school 2000s pop track with a house beat attached to it, and it's really well done in that regard. However, I was hoping that some of the melodies would end up becoming more captivating. It is the one teaser track that ends up becoming the least memorable when it comes to its melodies and its vocals. However, it has great production to it. This then leads us to a much more soothing direction and much more passionate with the track Clouds, another track that goes into a kind of different direction of house music, but this one, outside of its awesome beat and sound, it also has gorgeous vocals and gorgeous melodies, and I'm usually not that much of a fan of pop tracks that are this laid back, but I think that Slayyter did a great job with this one, and it's definitely one of the highlights of the album. And then we have another change of pace with the next two teaser tracks. At first we have Cowboys, where this is where you also have those dance pop and electropop elements, but it's also combined with like pop rock and noise pop, and it makes for a really great combination of sounds. It goes back to some of the more aggressive elements that you would find at the beginning of the album. However, Cowboys is extremely melodic and sentimental in a way, which really makes it stand out. And then we get to the final teaser track over this, which for me this is an awesome track and possibly the most unique moment out of this album. Even in like hyperpop standards, I don't recall into listening to anything else like this. Over This is such a unique song because you basically get a dance pop formula, but it feels like it has elements that you would find in like 2000s pop rock era. Like this track truly has the vibe of a 2000s Avril Lavigne song, but it's combined with this more recent type of pop sound with those really aggressive and distorted bass lines and beats and those quite futuristic vocal passages, and it makes for an experience that feels unlike anything else, and I fell in love with this song. This is possibly my favorite track out of this album. It is gorgeous, it is excellent, I love the chorus, and overall, yeah, it is a track that really feels unique and something else. And now that the 6 main singles are out of the way, there are 6 songs remaining out of this album. A pretty short album, but once again, this is another album that is quite inconsistent. Like, you don't really know in which direction it really wants to go. The thing is that with those 6 tracks, it already made a great impression and it had enough material in order to make it a really cool release. However, it would definitely be much better if the rest of the album was also as cool, which is not really the case. Once again, getting into the deep cuts, there was nothing that was really all that impressive. There were still some pretty good moments, like I wouldn't say there were that many moments that could bring the album down, unlike the 2019 mixtape, but once again it was an album that had the potential for something better, even if it is a much bigger improvement compared to what she did a few years back. Now, getting into some of the deep cuts, the first 5 tracks in the album definitely have a much different vibe compared to the rest of the album. At the first 5 tracks is where you get a bit of a more monotone, straightforward, aggressive approach, which as the album progresses, starting with the track Troubled Paradise, it would become much more melodic and more sort of emotional in some occasions, with some really powerful choruses. Now, Venom as a track really disappointed me. Even when it comes to the beats and the ideas, it felt pretty lackluster, but I really do not understand why we once again have another occasion with the word Venom delivered in a way like this. Like, wasn't enough with Eminem butchering this and making a really bad impression in the way he delivered that word? So why do we have another Venom song being ruined? Why can't you not just say like Lil Sims? Like, she delivered it in an awesome way. Doghouse seemed to be a pretty decent idea that would definitely progress into something more, Like, this is a really short track that doesn't really offer that much, even if it has some pretty nice ideas to it. I like the beats and I like the aggressive elements at some occasions. And then you have the track Butterflies, which is possibly one of the best tracks when it comes to its sound. I really like the sound choices, the production. The kick on this song is really cool, but it really serves as an interlude and it doesn't really do all that much in the track listing. It had potential though for something better. It was one of those deep cuts that really had one of the most unique and most refreshing ideas out of this whole project. The track Serial Killer and Villain seem to give a lot of focus in like the vocals, like being extremely futuristic with a heavy dose of autotune, and in my opinion both of those songs were fine, were pretty decent. However, I still think that they could have done a bit of a better job with those two tracks because they had potential for something better. And finally, the album ends with the track Letters, which is the most soothing moment in the album. Is like a guitar ballad, and you know it has a few electronic elements at the second half, but you do know me when it comes to those types of songs. I don't really like them. I find them to be boring and forgettable and somewhat pointless, and this didn't really feel like a good way to end this album. At no other point did we get a similar moment like this, and it felt kind of unnecessary considering the intensity we get with the majority of this album. So for me, Slayter's debut, Troubled Paradise, could have been executed better in some occasions, that's for sure, but still for me this ends up becoming one of the greatest pop releases of this year. I really like its variety, even if it makes for a mess of a release and it's not always executed properly, but when it does, it makes for some spectacular results, some of my favorites of this year. And Slayyter made a pretty solid album that went in multiple directions, experimented with multiple sounds in the pop sphere, and it makes for a pretty intriguing release. That even if the majority of the quality comes from the singles, it's still good enough to make it a good release overall and a vast improvement of her previous mixtape 2 years ago. I'm going to give Troubled Paradise a 7+ out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. If you like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.